Hi everyone. Very happy to be here with Dr. Keating, another guest for our channel. Dr. Keating, would you be willing to just go ahead and introduce a little bit about yourself?
Okay. My name is Janet Keating. I am a medical doctor, family practice trained, um, now retired, and still trying to get used to that. Okay. This is one of those times when my brain just goes blank. Um, so
I
anyway,
have that
I'm
all
a
done.
family physician. I trained about 30 years ago, actually 35 years ago at the University of Missouri. I did my residency in family medicine at Duke University, and that's how I'm still connected. Um, I um, have worked at a variety of jobs, traditional family practice for the first few years. I was at Duke Student Health for several years. After that, I actually worked at the federal prison in Butner at their medical center for about 4 years. And then I ended up at Murdoch Developmental Center up in Butner as well, working with adults with intellectual disabilities and particularly some special programs for children as well as adults with um, multiple diagnoses, so autistic and intellectually disabled and psychiatric diagnoses as well. It was actually my favorite place to work. I'm kind of sorry I left. I was there for 9 years and really enjoyed it. But my first love is still hospice, and I ended up coming to Florida to work in hospice and worked here for 6 years and then finally retired. Um, so I've had quite a varied career, which some would say is probably an indication of the fact that I'm also autistic. And it's hard for me to stay in one place for very long. Um, and that's been a big part of my journey. Not knowing I was autistic until about 2 years ago is another part of the journey.
Yeah. So those are kind of part of the reason why I'm so excited to interview you both because you do have such a varied background in a lot of the, I guess, institutions or systems that I'm particularly interested in, like how can we
Mhm.
make the healthcare system more inclusive? And then
Right.
also what your own journey has been like, going through so much of your life not knowing that you're autistic. So my next question is just, what has that journey been like? And what has it been like to realize that you're autistic?
Well, I think the journey has been interesting. I think the interesting part of it, looking back on it, has been how I somehow or another have managed to find my place in the world, not without some bumps, I will say that, but looking for the places where I fit and I felt comfortable. And that has meant I've changed jobs a little bit more often than the average person probably does. I have been fired a couple of times because they didn't know what to do with me. That was really, one, yeah, yeah, that's been across the board over many years of working in a variety of things. I actually started out as a medical technologist working in hospital laboratories. Um, I've always wanted to know how things work. I've been particularly interested in how living things work, and started working in a hospital when I was 15. So that has been a continued theme, the healthcare professions. I worked as a medical technologist until I was in my mid 20s and then looked into going to medical school and continued from there. Um, Interestingly enough, I think because I was in a family that had autistic members, but again, just what would now be considered low support needs. Um, so I grew up in an environment that was actually pretty friendly for my autism. We didn't do a lot of entertaining. We had neighbors that we enjoyed visiting with, but they didn't really come over. I had one or two close friends at any given time. So it was kind of an environment where I was really in some ways sort of sheltered. And it really probably wasn't until high school and college where I just kind of high school was when I kept wondering when the aliens were going to come and pick me up because I clearly was not in the right place. And
And
of course, imagine my surprise later when I found the wrong planet website. It's like, oh, I found my people. Anyway, uh, that was growing up. Again, I just kind of managed to be, I think, fairly amazingly loyal to myself in terms of pushing some things where I really wanted to do more. I actually really wanted to be an astronaut, is what I wanted to do, but that didn't work out, which is fine, probably a good thing. But it drove me to each next level of my education, and just helped me be true to myself in terms of the situations that I would put myself in. And although it seemed somewhat embarrassing at the time, if I ended up in a work situation I didn't feel comfortable in, for whatever reason, I very quickly got out of it if I could. Obviously, once I was in medical school, I was dealing with different situations where sometimes I couldn't get out of it. That tended to be harder, but I was also in a position where I was older. I had already had some self-care things in place. I love to knit. I love to read. I love to go to movies by myself. All of those things, I would take myself away. And so those are the kinds of things I do. And then when something seemed to be important for me to figure out, I would figure it out. So in terms of relationships, I actually did not have a significant relationship with anybody over my lifetime until I was in my 30s and realized that I was lesbian. And that was probably why I didn't have any interest in guys, but I just thought I was too busy with other things. And met a wonderful person who I am still married to after 30 years. And I have been very, very lucky that she has actually recognized who I was probably long before I did. She recognized that I had not typical reactions in social situations, that I really didn't like being in crowds for all that long. So that was actually very helpful. And then from there, the interesting piece was sort of at a point in my life where I truly had a meltdown, which I now recognize was a true meltdown. And I just assumed, it was my the death of a parent, addition of a daughter to the family, changing jobs, enough things converging that anybody would have a crash, but I had a major crash. And I was asked to go to counseling. And at one point, the therapist that I was seeing actually said to me, I don't care if you're autistic, just get your act together. And I looked at her like, autistic? We were not talking about autistic here. And, I had no concept for the fact that you can have low support needs and be very verbal and be autistic. So that kind of planted a seed. I did end up getting a formal diagnosis of ADHD, but it really was just within the last couple of years that I was reading an article in the New York Times about women with disabilities, and there was a woman who was talking about her journey with discovering that she was autistic. And everything I read was like, that's me. That's wait a minute, that's me. How did I get to this point and not know that? But again, it was a time when I could embrace the information, apparently. So, as I do with everything, I started reading all about it. I have a million books on autism now, on autism in women, on autism in older women, and the file on my computer is like exploding with everything I've been reading. But it's really, it's been a good journey. It's really nice to know that that's what's been going on. And as part of that journey, I'll just segue into the next piece. I got to thinking that I can't be the only doctor, female doctor in the world who's autistic. And so I started looking on Facebook and just the internet. But I found the group that we've talked about, Autistic Doctors International. It's actually a group of doctors in the United Kingdom, in the British Isles, that started this about 3 years ago. Believe it or not, we're up over 700 members now around the world. And there's a lot of work coming out from them in the medical journals, in the academic literature now, including a survey that they did of the membership a few months ago that they're now going through the data and getting ready to publish on just the difficulty of more or less constantly masking or trying to be in a medical environment, not just as a patient, which is bad enough. We can get to that in a minute. But also as a working physician, and the things that we're expected to do that I did most of them. But my executive function is lousy. When I got into trouble, it was never for patient care. It was because of administrative chores, not getting charts done, not getting things signed, getting behind on that kind of thing.
It does seem like, to the extent that neurodiversity is starting to enter the conversation, it's always in the context of autistic or neurodivergent patients. And I think people forget that doctors can also be autistic or neurodivergent. And
Oh, yeah.
so
Well, I mean,
yeah.
and that's the thing. I think that we're forgetting that if we really are, what is it, 1 in 68 now?
Yeah, I even saw 1 in 44, I believe.
I've seen that number as well. But I mean, if we're literally getting to be close to half the population, okay, there's a lot of us out there, and not understanding. And I love this analogy because it's so perfect. That some of us are Apple and some of us are Android. And it particularly makes sense because my wife loves her Android and her Windows, and I'm all Mac. I'm straight Mac, Apple across across the board. But and how that affects so many people. One of the things that I really have focused on, and I want to focus on in retirement and do some writing, is talking about how miserable the medical environment is for just about everybody right now, but particularly for autistic people, for people with other sensory perception issues. When I was working at the developmental center up in Butner, that was one of the things that they did so incredibly well, was to be able to be totally aware of each individual's preferences, sensory preferences, needs, what kind of environment they were comfortable and happy in. And some of them wanted to be out in the middle of every big gathering and being very, very social. And some of them wanted to sit in the corner and have their particular item that made them happy and listen to music, and that was provided, that was attended to, which I thought was amazing. I wish we could do that everywhere.
That is, so that does kind of tie into my next question, which is
Okay.
sort of what supports, I guess the next question is what supports you wish that you've had available to you, but also it could be what supports from your experience do you wish were more available in medical settings or care
Mhm.
settings
Yeah.
in general?
Um, the supports that I wished I'd had more of, I did have a tendency to push for those things when I could push for them. One was an office for myself. I unfortunately started into practice when the whole idea of, oh, let's have a big open area where everybody can collaborate. And like, okay. And that was before noise canceling headphones. Um, so I was constantly trying to find a place I could work where there wasn't a million other things going on in the background. Um, I don't think we still have an idea of how that affects people in a medical environment, whether they're patients or they're working there. But to segue, well, I'm going to do the one other thing I would have liked is to have more control over my schedule. Um, Seeing 25 patients a day does not allow me to spend the time I want with someone to get the information I might need or provide the help they need. And it definitely means that I'm going to spend 3 or 4 hours that evening doing the administrative work, which after 10 hours in the office, uh-uh. But that's where I kept getting into trouble, finding environments where that was less of an issue. So quite honestly, state and federal government institutions where there wasn't that kind of a productivity schedule. And hospice was close, but it was starting to also move into you need to see this many patients a day. So that's a piece that anyone would benefit from, is to not feel like you're on a factory assembly line having to complete
So,
X, Y, and Z when you're dealing with human beings and human beings' problems and needs. Um, for people who are going into a medical environment and are autistic or have other sensory needs, um, I think being a self advocate is going to be very important. I would caution people, though, that they're going to get pushback because there's still this attitude that we just need to get people in and out. And okay, you're feeling bad, you need this, come and get your antibiotics for your sore throat and get out of here. And there's a whole remake that needs to be done to the entire medical system for everyone, not just people with neurodivergence who have another layer of needs. It's for everybody. The symbol, in case have you seen the website? Did you go take a look at it?
the Autistic Doctors International
Yeah,
website.
yeah.
I saw it, but I forget what the layout is.
It's a canary. It's a really kind of roughly drawn yellow bird. It's the canary in the coal mine.
Oh yeah, that's such a good metaphor because you're right. When autistic patients need like a competent, compassionate care that's not rushed, it's going to benefit
Yes,
everyone. No one wants to be rushed through their appointment. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And I think that's a piece that we are missing. Um, it has a lot to do with medicine becoming a big business, and there are efficiencies there that are important, but we're running over people pursuit of efficiency and profits. And I will now step off of my soapbox, stepping off of my soapbox now. Because if you get me started on this, I will go on forever. But that's really, there are people out there working on that, the Autistic Doctors International. And what I'm finding is that Great Britain, Australia, Canada, and really Europe in general, but particularly Great Britain, they're way ahead of us in terms of looking at what autism is truly and not what the perception is, and providing supports, providing at least evaluations so people can get the supports they need. I'm self-diagnosed, and I want to say self-identified because I thought about getting an evaluation. I even looked into it briefly, and I just said, why? I'm absolutely convinced. I know who I am. And I've probably done more work with autistic people at all different levels than anybody I'm going to be seeing. So yeah, if you do your own medicine, you have a fool for a doctor, is that? But I'm comfortable with that at this point. Now that it seems to be acceptable within the community, and I don't want to presume, but I'm comfortable with being self-identified. So
Yeah, absolutely. From my perspective, I feel like realizing that you're autistic is kind of analogous to realizing that you're transgender or realizing any other aspect of your identity. It's something inherent. And I think, provided that someone's working with the accurate definition of autism, who then better than the person knows whether they've had differences in
right.
social interaction, sensory processing differences, etc.
Yeah. Well, and that's very much how I feel. Once I acknowledged that I was gay, I laughed. I said, I blasted out of the closet on rocket engines. There's nothing wrong with me. I just don't fit with the world the way it's constructed currently. But I know there's areas where I do fit. And I think that's the thing, is how do we expand people's awareness of the fact that we can make spaces and places, medical offices, medical visits. I mean, that was, again, working with the lower or the higher support need people. I mean, these were people who needed constant round the clock care for the most part that I worked with. And the people that were doing the care were aware of what the sensory needs were, what the cognitive needs were, what the environment needed to be like, and accommodated that without question. That was why we were there, to help this person have the best life that they could have.
Mm.
And it was pretty amazing. And I wish we could do that for everyone. And it would take considerably less effort than it certainly did for some of these people with very complex needs. Just a quieter environment and an attention to not everybody's the same in terms of how they feel comfortable.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that sort of ties into, like, throughout our conversation, you mentioned sort of your intense desire to constantly learn more about people and about, like, whatever you mentioned that you have your kind of exploding folder on autism in your computer. I was wondering, do you feel like that's been kind of that hunger for information has been a sort of a positive for you as a doctor? And are there any other positives that you feel are overlooked for doctors who are neurodivergent, whether that's neurodivergent from autism, mental health, anything else? Yeah.
Well, I think first of all that empathy. I was always part of the reason somebody said you can't be autistic because you have empathy. It's like, wrong answer. I think empathy is important. I think empathy is understanding or having the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes.
Mm.
And I think we have that to a larger degree because we have to. But I also think that one of the advantages for autistic doctors is that hyper focus.
Mm.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be hyper focus on something like really academic or some kind of research project. My hyper focus is I want to know what's going on with this person. Obviously there's something going on. I haven't quite put my finger on what they need. And I would read through volumes of charts trying to find information that might be a clue to something from 10 years before that I might need to know about. And it really seemed to be my superpower. It was making that connection to try and figure out what we call the zebras, I guess. In medicine, they say, if you hear hoofbeats in North Carolina, it's horses, not zebras. Yeah, we went straight past zebras to unicorns. And that was always something that really fascinated me is, okay, there's got to be an answer for this. And so digging and digging until I find an answer or I start putting the pieces together. And I'm doing that with my study into adult autism now. So I think that's a consistent strength that's come through in just conversations with autistic professional colleagues is special interests. I've always been really interested in this. I'm happy to have a chance to really look into it. And it's not just the academic or technical research. There's a puzzle here that needs to be solved. Why is this person not happy? What do we need to do to make them happy? How can we help them be comfortable? And that's where hospice comes in too. My goal with hospice is I don't ever want to see anybody in the last days of their life in pain, um, nausea, uncomfortable. I want them to be able to be alert and enjoy their time with their family, their friends, not hooked up to a bunch of machines. And that's where I can get very passionate. So that's where doctors can be very, 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 doctors who are autistic can be very helpful because they see a different part of that world.
That compassion is so needed, and
it is so
especially
needed
in the hospice setting, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
And I guess the last question I had is kind of sort of related to that. What advice would you give to other autistic doctors, especially those who are doubting themselves or feeling uncertain of whether they're cut out to be a doctor?
Well, the first thing is find your peeps. If I could tell them all about this wonderful community that is growing so rapidly and being so terribly supportive to each other. It is a private group, but there are avenues and people find their way there, just like I did. Don't be afraid to explore what you need. What are the things that really prevent you from being a really good doctor? And for me, it was finding an environment where it was less about productivity and more about patient care. And some of those areas are not typical. They're not a traditional practice. They're not a traditional hospital setting. They may be a nursing home or an institution that you wouldn't think would be someplace you would like, but you may find that the good that you can do there and the people that are already there and finding tend to be fairly compassionate. So as well, that's why they work there. They want to help. Most of them are not there just for the money. Believe me. So that would be my advice, is find your community and then really think about what it is that brings you satisfaction when you're doing your job and that you feel comfortable with.
It's great advice. And I'll try and put, for what it's worth, I'll try and put the link to the Autistic Doctors International page below the video description so people can click on it and learn.
Right, their general website.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Because it does sound like such an awesome group. And thank you so much again for letting me interview you. And I think it's really neat to learn from your experience. And I hope we have more autistic doctors in the future.
Well, we're out there. We just got to find each other.
So, thank you so much again.
You're welcome. Thank you. Have a good evening.